Wherever it happens, and whatever the reason, a crash landing in water is a frightening and potentially deadly experience. In this real pilot story, we'll hear from Bryan Webster, a Canadian pilot who survived such a crash landing and later went on to train thousands of pilots in underwater egress techniques. He'll tell the story of his accident and share insights on how to prepare should something similar ever happen to you.
My name is Bryan Webster. I got my private license at a place called Pitt Meadows, which is a small airport just a little bit east of Vancouver International Airport in British Columbia. And when I was 17 years old, I was well into my flight training. I had about 40 hours. And I went for a ride with a family friend in a Cessna 150. And this fellow, he loved aerobatics. Believe it or not, he beefed up the airplane a little bit. So we went not too far from our local airport. There was a training area about 30 miles away. Went up and did aerobatics. And then on the way back, we're coming from the east to the west. And the sun was setting, so there was a very large glow of orange, and we were heading directly for it. So you had very limited basic visibility forward. And we're coming along basically low down a river, because this fella did enjoy low flight, and he was a bit of a risk taker. We came down around a corner over top of what's called the Fraser River. So we're coming along, and we're about, I'd say maybe 5 minutes from landing. And we come around between an island and a shore, and looking straight into the sun, you couldn't see ahead hardly at all. And at the last second, I just saw a group of power lines right in front of us. We're probably about, I'd say, 100 feet in the air. So anyways, I just yelled lines. And the pilot, he attempted first to go over them. And if you can picture these, there's a stanchion on either side from shore to island. And the span was probably about a half a mile. And there were 16 of them, so they drew. They go from about 150 feet up right down to about 30 feet over the water. So basically, we were at about the third wire, and we were very close to them. So he attempted to go over them just for a second. I remember him pulling back hard on the control. But it's obvious we were going to go right into the wire. So at the last second, he pushed ahead, and next thing that I recall, we're literally going straight down vertical to the water with the throttle full. And the wires were close enough that as they went by the window, I thought it was going to catch the tail. At the last second, he pulled back, and we hit hard. And we hit absolutely flat. Had it been low tide instead of high tide, we would have cleared it, but there just wasn't the room. And the aircraft immediately evacuated the front windshield, so it was a high, intense water pressure right in your eyes. It would be similar to having a fire hose put right in your face. And the good part of that was that with the pressure coming through the front windshield, it blew both doors right wide open. As a matter of fact, they're wrapped right around the wing struts. The next thing I remember is silence. We're both unconscious, and I'm sinking, and I felt water coming up my nose, and that's where all of a sudden I shook my head and came back to. So I glanced over at my buddy, and he was still unconscious, hanging in the straps, and he was bleeding profusely from the top of his head. And I saw he was obviously not going to be helping, so I went out my right door. The water was halfway up the door, maybe a little more, and it was sinking, I would say not rapidly, but it was sinking steadily. I got out of the aircraft, and then I was stopped, and I didn't realize, but there was a coily cord with a hand mic. Ironically, it had wrapped around my leg about 3 times. So when I got out, the cord stretched, but I got to basically almost the back of the aircraft when all of a sudden I realized I was stuck and I couldn't go any further. So I went back, and I tried to break it, and it wouldn't pull out. And it wouldn't break. I tried. So I had to reach inside and unplug it. And by the time I'd done that, the aircraft was sinking rapidly. And I went around the back of the airplane, but it was quite simplistic because it had actually folded in half, so it had broke its back. And so I went underneath the tail, which was straight up in the air, and the body was inverted. So in any event, got around the other side. His door was already open, luckily. I reached inside, and by this time, his head was already underwater. I reached in, felt his belt, and it was 5-point military harnesses. we probably generated about 20 G-force, which is 20 times your upper body weight going forwards. And the only reason we survived, and I'm 100% sure of this, is because we had good quality aerobatic style or military style belts. As it turned out, I found the latch for these, clicked it, and the tide was coming right through the aircraft. So I floated out my arms, and I started trying to stand on the wing strut, but the airplane was sinking. And next thing you know, the wheel, I saw it basically right at eye level, and then boop, it was gone. So I had him in a chokehold and started swimming towards the shore.
Webster managed to tow his friend to shore, where they were assisted by two fishermen who had witnessed the crash. The pilot suffered a broken ankle and a scalp wound requiring 12 stitches, but Webster escaped with little more than bruises.
So the two things that I personally learned from this were, first off, if you're going to low fly, don't do it if you're visually impaired by the sun or weather or whatever the case is. You just shouldn't be down there. The second thing was that basically seatbelts do save lives. If you own the airplane, I would get a proper set, at least a 4-harness set, but just have a good, solid set of seatbelts. The singles, they work, but on a hit like that, I can pretty well assure you my body would have gone by the belt, and I still would have hit the dash and been knocked out cold.
Sobered but undeterred by the accident, Webster went on to become a commercial pilot, eventually logging thousands of hours hauling freight in Cessna caravans. One day, while departing over water, his aircraft suffered a catastrophic engine failure. He managed to make it back to the airport, but in retrospect worried that he'd been unprepared for what might have happened. The incident moved him to lobby for water egress training for the company's pilots, but he soon found that no such training existed outside the military. The solution was to develop a program himself. Over the next few years, he continued to fly while giving training on the side. By 2001, however, he was so busy that he decided to leave his flying career and run his company, Aviation Egress Training Systems, full-time.
We've now trained 5,000 plus people. We operate all over Canada, but we draw a lot of folks from the U.S. We've basically managed to save some lives, there's no question of that. But we've also managed to arm 5,000 people with the understanding and the tools that they need to handle a situation should they end up in the water.
In 15 years of egress training, Webster has had plenty of opportunities to study the mistakes pilots make after crash landing in water. Here are some of the things you should keep in mind.
The folks who fly in colder water have a high chance of being basically cold shocked. So the folks that are down in Florida and so on, they say, oh, airplanes ditch all the time. Most people get out, no big deal. In Canada, because we have the colder water temperatures, and Alaska as well, the mortality rate, and I won't give you a percentage, but it's extremely high. It's simple. Colder the water, the bigger the challenge for getting out of the aircraft. Now, life vests. If you're a private pilot flying across water in a single-engine airplane, it's highly advisable to wear them. And there's a number of different companies who can provide them. My big thing is, if you know you're going into water and you're in an engine failure situation for whatever the reason, you've got time, just pull out the life vest if you don't already have it in your body, rip it out of the bag and stuff it in your jacket. Because to hold on to things underwater while you're opening doors, your paramount survival instinct says, I need to get air. And you'll go with good intentions, even in training, with that life vest in your hand. But if you get to the door and the door won't open for any reason, then immediately drop that because all you care about is air. If you're in a low-wing airplane, bear in mind if you're inverted, the wing is above you. And that's something that people just don't give any thought to. The other thing is, in most low wings, structurally, they often only have one door. And rarely they have a window that opens. My reason for saying that is if you're going into water, it's very, very important you get the door open before you hit, if at all possible. And in most of those types of equipment, you have two handles, one top, one bottom. And it doesn't sound like much, but as soon as you have two items underwater to deal with, your time limit is roughly 15 seconds before you go into total panic. Trust me, I've dealt with this for many, many years. What it comes down to is a person has to get the doors open, and if you're holding your breath underwater and there's challenges, as in more than just one simple lock, then all of a sudden your heart starts to pound, and that limited air that you have now goes out at an exponential speed just by the very design of our bodies. And adrenaline starts to flow, which makes us very strong, but not necessarily intelligent. But what it comes down to is you got to think this out in advance. If I'm in a low wing, the wing's going to be above me if I'm inverted. If I'm in an airplane that has a window that opens, then that's my emergency exit should the door be jammed, which they do jam. And you don't realize, but if the wing is disrupted in any way, in other words, if the strut's bent and the wing comes down even a few degrees, then that door hits and it will not open. What we teach is the 4-part series. And what that is you immediately, once the airplane's stopped, inverted, you reach over and open the door. Now, hopefully the door's already open because you would have opened it before impact. But if you couldn't, you open the door, and then with that same hand, being the pilot, you grab the airframe on the outside or your reference point, and that identifies the exit. Then and only then, you undo your seatbelt, grab your life vest if you haven't already got it in your shirt, and head out the door. Now, if you were to undo your seatbelt as soon as you're upside down, then the chances of getting out of that aircraft have just dropped substantially, because immediately you're going to turn upside down to the airframe, which is already upside down, but you're going to be backwards to it. And even to find that door handle once you come out of your seatbelt is a major challenge.
Washington State seaplane pilot Steve Verbarnzi can provide sobering testimony to the confusion and disorientation that can result from such situations. A graduate of egress training, he witnessed a friend's cold water seaplane accident and participated in rescue attempts, during which he experienced the difficulty of performing a seemingly simple task like opening a cockpit door.
You don't have a lot of time to formulate anything. You better rehearse what you're going to do, because that's what you're going to do. One thing that I'll never forget is I couldn't remember. I've ridden into 206 several times. I couldn't remember for the life of me how the seatbelt latched up and what the door handle configuration was. They taught us in egress training is to orient yourself and trace around the object that you're trying to focus on. In this case, the door handle. And so I could come across, I could feel the door handle, but when I went in my mind, it was like a block on the door panel, and the handle would have been even with the front, where if I came over the front, I could hook the handle and pull it up, but everything's upside down. So you're feeling upside down, and I'd feel the handle, and I'd slide to the front of the handle, but then there was no end to pull. And I kept pulling over it, and then you couldn't stay any longer, and you'd go up, and the other gentleman would go down, and we did that probably somewhere between 5 and 6 times.
If there's a single lesson to be learned from all of this, it's to be prepared. The experience of underwater escape is foreign to most people, and there's often very little room for error. If you don't get it right the first time, there may not be a second chance.
If anyone is flying a float plane, they're crazy if they don't go do that egress training. I would recommend it highly, like your life depended on it.